Okay, so I just want to do. I was going to say I wanted to do a film review, but instead of doing a film review, this is a film I was going to discuss. Mandela: Long Walk to Freedom. Um, it's a very good film if you haven't seen it, and it's loosely based on the biography of the same name, autobiography, I should say, Nelson Mandela's Long Walk to Freedom. Um, One thing I like about this film is it shows Mandela warts and all, so to speak. It does show his human side. It shows his shortcomings. It shows the fact that he was a man, um, not a marble statue. Notwithstanding the previous video I made, which I stand by, I never, I'm never inconsistent in terms of how sincere I am in my videos. If I ever change my mind, I'm upfront about that. So, notwithstanding the previous video I made on Mandela's hypocrisy, which I do stand by, I do want to reiterate why I think he was a truly great man. And this is an appropriate time to do it. This is the third anniversary of his death. This is the 5th of December. He died 3 years ago tonight. Um, this is an interesting article from that time. And it's an article by Jonathan Clayton. Jonathan Clayton. There's obviously extensive coverage in the paper, but this one caught my attention. I was just kind of browsing through this. Mandela was no saint, but there can have been few greater human beings. And this is the opening paragraph. I'm not a saint unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying, was one of Nelson Mandela's favourite quotations. Despite the disclaimer, for many people across the world, the affable former convict, apparently devoid of bitterness after 27 years of incarceration, was precisely that, a living saint. In any competition for the world's greatest leaders, the hero of the struggle against apartheid and the first democratically elected president of South Africa unfailingly came out on top. Mother Teresa, Mahatma Gandhi, the Burmese opposition leader Aung San Suu Kyi may all figure too, but usually some way behind. You know, without getting into hyperbole, I don't think it is an exaggeration to say that Nelson Mandela probably is the most universally admired person of my lifetime. And I say without getting into hyperbole because, like I said in the previous video, I am very wary of personality cults. Um, Mandela had plenty of flaws. In his younger days, he was a womanizer. There were accusations that he beat his first wife, which is hardly an upstanding claim. He flirted with communism, and throughout his life, he had a passive attitude to totalitarian regimes like Castro's and Gaddafi's. But by the same token, it should also be remembered that this was a man who shared platforms with right wing leaders like Margaret Thatcher and F.W. de Klerk for that matter. And I can think of few people who transcended left and right in such a way. Mandela's obviously much more to the left, but the universal appeal of this man is astounding. And everything I said in the previous video does stand. He did make too many excuses for foreign dictatorships, i.e., outside South Africa. He done too little too late on Zimbabwe. He was slavish in his loyalty to the ANC, which sometimes blinded him to their many shortcomings, for example, the response to AIDS. His successor's approach to that was a disgrace. But Mandela's achievements can never be understated. To be incarcerated for 27 years, to come out to a country on the brink of civil war, racial civil war, and to almost single handedly unify that nation, become its president, voluntarily step down after one term in a continent where that is extremely rare, that is astonishing. And to one point in your life be seen as a terrorist, and then on your death be hailed across the world. I can't think of any other example of anyone that comes close to that. And I wouldn't compare Castro because Castro has at least as many critics as admirers. Mandela had his critics, but I would argue far more admirers. Because even those who at some points were staunch Mandela critics ended up admiring him. His jailers, for example, the same could not be said of Castro. The same could not be said of other very famous figures. Looking around the world right now, I'm thinking of people of Mandela's generation, i.e., in their 80s and 90s, who come close to his level of fame and prestige. I think of Queen Elizabeth II, of course, Mikhail Gorbachev, Helmut Kohl, George Bush Sr., Jimmy Carter. They're all people of that sort of generation, and they're all big names. There'll be a lot of news when they pass, but I don't think anyone comes close to Nelson Mandela, and I'm not sure if there ever will be. It's possible. There will be other great people out there, but I think Aung San Suu Kyi's reputation has been deeply damaged by her attitude to her sort of blasé, neutral attitude to the plight of the Rohingya people. I think that's going to damage her legacy. And she is a great person. What she's done in Burma is remarkable. But yeah, I don't think anyone will come close to Mandela. Um, and what does that do? It inspires people. Mandela may have been he may have been used violent resistance. He may have flirted with communism. He may have been a womanizer. He may have had a very dubious relationship with totalitarian regimes. But ultimately, the number of people this man inspired was remarkable. And I think this film really shows it. I think it's a really good film because it does show all the darker side of the struggle. It shows the necklacing that the ANC used. Um, it showed his flaws as a young man, but it also showed how he brought people together, how he inspired people. Mandela could have become a dictator. That's the point. When he became president, he could well have become a dictator. He could well have ignited civil war in South Africa and got revenge on the white minority, but never happened, at least not on a major scale. In the early 90s, South Africa was a tinderbox. And that is remarkable. That really is remarkable. Many of the other great leaders out there didn't have the personal hardship that Mandela had. Do want to say some things though, because I've been researching this over the past hour or so. Thatcher, there is an interesting, who of course died the same year as Nelson Mandela, and she herself was a major figure of the 20th century. But one thing the left are always saying about Thatcher is that she supported apartheid. Now, literally in the last few hours, I have seen another perspective on this. And I think it has to be said. I doubt many people will hear this, but it has to be said. Both Nelson Mandela and F.W. de Klerk said that Margaret Thatcher was an enemy of apartheid. She was a critic of apartheid. It is true that she called the ANC a terrorist organization, but there's no actual evidence she called Mandela himself a terrorist. Now, where the difference lay, according to Mandela, was in the approach. They differed somewhat on the approach that should be taken to end apartheid. But she was actually the only British Prime Minister who did put sanctions on South Africa. And the hard left continued to make out that she was a great enemy of Mandela. Another thing, Mandela was an Anglophile. He loved this country. Um, so, there's a lot of disinformation out there. F.W. de Klerk, incidentally, I think, was himself quite a remarkable man when you consider the transitionary role he had. He's obviously not on the scale of Mandela, but I think F.W. de Klerk will go down as a pretty significant figure in his own right. Anyway, I'm going to round this up fairly soon. I'll just say that Idris Elba was superb at that role. It's interesting, with all due respect to Morgan Freeman, for a long time he was seen as the actor who would play Mandela, and indeed he did in Invictus. But Idris Elba sounded like Mandela's ghost. The voice was spot on. Morgan Freeman may have a slight more of a resemblance to Mandela, but Idris Elba just got the voice perfect. So that's it, really. That's all I want to say. Mandela had many faults, but he was a truly great man, and there's no way to gloss that over. And I would say to those who make some nonsense about Mandela that he was a racist and so on, if Nelson Mandela was a racist, he would have got revenge on the white minority when he became president. Never happened. That's something that needs to be remembered. He was a great man, and for all his faults, no one can underplay his massive achievements. Massive. The very fact he inspired tens of millions of people around the world is remarkable, and he still does. And I can't think of anyone that comes close. Muhammad Ali was a pretty iconic figure, but he was ultimately a sports figure and a cultural figure. He was never really a political leader in the way he's sometimes made out to be. In my view, he wasn't. So yeah, that's it. Um, so I think it is important to be honest about Mandela, his faults, and he had many, but that doesn't downplay the massive, massive role he played. There you have it.